Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive into the surprisingly unglamorous, often horrifying ways people shuffled off their mortal coils in ancient Rome. Forget the grand gladiator battles and epic last stands, we're talking about the everyday, truly awful, and sometimes incredibly mundane methods of demise that awaited the average Roman. Imagine yourself wandering through those bustling, chaotic streets, the smell of garum and something unidentifiable wafting through the air. And suddenly, boom, you're a goner, and not in any heroic fashion. A lot of these deaths, you'll find, were the kind you probably wouldn't survive today, even with all our modern medicine and safety regulations. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're strolling through the Suburra, the teeming, vibrant, and incredibly dangerous district of ancient Rome. The air is thick with the shouts of vendors, the clang of hammers from blacksmiths, and the distant murmur of the crowd from the forum. You might be heading to the public baths, or perhaps just running an errand for your patron. But as you navigate the narrow, winding alleys, you become acutely aware of the sheer density of the city. Buildings, often multiple stories high, lean precariously over the streets, their timber frames groaning under the weight. This isn't some romanticized, marble-clad city of emperors. This is the gritty, lived-in Rome, and it's a death trap for the unwary. Consider, for a moment, the insula, those towering apartment blocks that housed the vast majority of Rome's population. You live on the fourth floor, maybe the fifth, in a small, cramped room with no running water. Every day, you climb those creaking wooden stairs, hoping they won't give way beneath your feet. The construction was often shoddy, rushed by greedy landlords looking to maximize profits. Imagine the terror as you lie in bed one night. The city sounds muffled by sleep, and suddenly, a deafening crack echoes through the building. The walls begin to crumble, dust fills the air, and the entire structure starts to collapse in on itself. You have mere seconds, if that, to react before you're buried under tons of rubble, a casualty of Rome's insatiable need for cheap housing. These collapses weren't rare occurrences. They were a chillingly common feature of urban life. Historians still debate the exact frequency, but archaeological evidence suggests that many parts of the city were rebuilt multiple times due to such catastrophes. You'd be crushed, suffocated, or perhaps impaled by a falling beam. A truly awful, ignominious end, far from any battlefield glory. Then there's the ever-present threat of fire. Rome was a city built largely of wood, with open flames used for cooking, heating, and lighting in every household. A single overturned oil lamp, a carelessly discarded ember, could quickly engulf an entire block. You're in your humble abode, perhaps sharing a meal with your family. When you smell it, the acrid scent of smoke. Soon, the shouts of incendium ring through the streets. Panic erupts. The narrow alleys become choked with people trying to escape, their desperation fueled by the sight of flames licking at the sky. You try to push through the throng, but the heat is unbearable, the smoke blinding. Perhaps you make it out, coughing and gasping, only to realize your child is still trapped inside. Or perhaps you don't make it out at all, succumbing to smoke inhalation before the flames even reach you. It's a terrifyingly fast and merciless way to go, leaving nothing but charred remains and a vacant plot where your life once thrived. The Great Fire of Rome under Nero is perhaps the most famous, but smaller, equally devastating fires were a daily reality. One famous historian quipped that living in Rome was like living in a permanent state of controlled chaos. And the constant threat of fire certainly contributed to that feeling. Let's not forget the sheer ingenuity, or lack thereof, in Roman urban planning when it came to sanitation. You're walking along a busy street, minding your own business, when suddenly, you hear a splash, a shout, and then something cold and unspeakably foul lands directly on your head. That's right, raw sewage. It was common practice for residents of upper floors to simply toss their waste out of the windows onto the street below. While usually just an unpleasant inconvenience, imagine the potential for infection: a small cut on your hand, an open sore on your leg. Suddenly, you're exposed to a cocktail of bacteria and disease that could easily lead to a slow, agonizing death. Sepsis, gangrene, and a host of other ailments awaited those unfortunate enough to come into contact with such filth. You'd develop a fever, your body would ache, and eventually, without modern antibiotics, you'd simply waste away. It's a truly awful thought, to be brought down by someone else's. Well, you get the picture. And what about the constant threat of crime? Rome, despite its sophisticated legal system, was a dangerous place after dark. You're heading home from a late-night gathering, the moon casting long shadows across the cobbled streets. Suddenly, you hear footsteps behind you, quickening. Before you can react, you're set upon by brigands. They want your purse, your jewelry, anything of value. You fight back, of course, but you're outnumbered. A swift blow to the head, a dagger plunged into your side, and it's over. Your body is left in a dark alley, discovered only hours later, or perhaps never at all, tossed into the Tiber to be swept away. Historians still debate the effectiveness of the Roman vigils, the city watchmen, in curbing nightly crime. While they patrolled, their numbers were often insufficient to truly secure every corner of the vast city. This wasn't the heroic death of a soldier on the frontier, but the brutal, anonymous end of someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a cold, hard truth of Roman life that your personal safety was often entirely in your own hands. Even something as seemingly innocuous as a trip to the baths could be fraught with peril. You're enjoying the warm waters, relaxing after a long day, when a floor tile gives way, sending you plunging into the scalding water below, or perhaps a sudden, violent brawl breaks out amongst bathers, and you're caught in the crossfire, struck down by a stray punch or a heavy stone. The public baths were central to Roman social life, but they were also crowded, sometimes rowdy places where accidents and violence could, and did, occur. You might drown, get trampled in a panicked rush, or even contract a nasty infection from the communal waters. Remember that time you slipped on a wet floor? Imagine that, but with hot water, slick marble, and a few hundred naked, sweaty Romans around you. A truly embarrassing and utterly dreadful way to go. And then there's the truly bizarre. Imagine you're at a public festival, perhaps watching some acrobats or a street performer. The crowd is dense, pushing and shoving for a better view. Suddenly, a runaway cart, perhaps laden with amphorae of wine, loses control and careers into the throng. You have no time to react. You're crushed beneath its wheels, or perhaps struck by a flying amphora. It's not the glorious death of a hero, but the sudden, ignominious end of a bystander. A forgotten name in the annals of accidental fatalities. Or perhaps, and this is a truly unique one, you're enjoying a quiet evening at home when a piece of a large monument, perhaps a statue or a column, simply falls off and lands on your head. This might sound like a joke, but the constant construction and occasional neglect of public works in Rome meant that such bizarre accidents were not entirely out of the question. You'd be instantly extinguished, without even realizing what happened, a true out-of-nowhere death. This reminds me of that old joke. Why did the Roman fall off the bridge because he was a terrible engineer? Okay, maybe not that funny when it's your actual demise. The dangers of Roman life extended to your very diet. You might be enjoying a delicious meal of bread, olives, and perhaps some roasted meat, unaware of the hidden dangers. Food preservation was rudimentary, and contamination was a constant threat. Imagine contracting dysentery from tainted water or food. You'd suffer from severe cramps, debilitating diarrhea, and dehydration. Without access to modern rehydration solutions or antibiotics, your body would simply waste away. It's a slow, agonizing decline, punctuated by constant pain and weakness, until your body finally gives up. This wasn't the result of some dramatic poisoning plot, but simply the grim reality of a pre-scientific understanding of hygiene. Even if you manage to avoid collapse, fire, disease, crime, and freak accidents, the sheer crush of humanity in Rome could be lethal. You're caught in a massive crowd, perhaps during a triumphal procession or a public spectacle. The press of bodies is suffocating. You can't breathe, and you can't move. You're slowly crushed, your ribs cracking under the immense pressure, your lungs collapsing. It's a terrifying, claustrophobic death, a silent scream lost in the roar of the crowd. This is a common phenomenon even today in large crowds. But in ancient Rome, with narrower streets and less organized crowd control, it was a very real danger. You'd be just another anonymous victim, suffocated by the very vibrancy of the city. You've managed to survive the collapsing insula, the raging fires, and the dubious hygiene of Rome's streets. Congratulations! But your journey through the perils of ancient Roman life is far from over. Now, let's turn our attention to something perhaps even more chilling: the state of Roman medicine. You fall ill, perhaps with a persistent cough or a fever that saps your strength. Naturally, you seek help. But remember, this isn't the era of antibiotics, sterile operating rooms, or even a basic understanding of germ theory. This is a world where medical knowledge is a strange blend of observation, superstition, and practices that, by modern standards, range from the bizarre to the utterly barbaric. Imagine you visit a Roman physician, or medicus. This isn't necessarily a trained professional as we understand them. Some were highly skilled, having studied in Alexandria or Greece, but many were little more than charlatans or barbers with a sideline in bloodletting. You describe your symptoms, perhaps a persistent headache. The medicus might nod sagely, stroke his beard, and then prescribe something truly horrifying. Perhaps he decides you have an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. The solution: bloodletting. You're instructed to lie down, and a vein is opened, often with a crude, unsterilized blade, to drain what is believed to be excess blood. You watch, perhaps fascinated or terrified, as your life force literally flows into a bowl. While intended to cure, this often led to weakness, infection, and ironically, a faster demise. You might already be weak from your illness, and losing a significant amount of blood could push you over the edge. Or perhaps your ailment is more severe: a deep wound, a fractured bone. The Roman surgical instruments, while surprisingly sophisticated for their time, were used without any concept of sterilization. Imagine a surgeon plunging a set of uncleaned bronze hooks into your flesh to extract a foreign object, or using a saw to amputate a gangrenous limb. The pain would be unimaginable, likely without effective anesthesia beyond perhaps some opium or mandrake. But the pain, as awful as it would be, might be the least of your worries. Infection would almost certainly set in. Your wound would swell, turn red, discharge pus, and smell foul. Fever would consume you. Your body racked with shivers and pain. You would slowly succumb to sepsis, your organs shutting down one by one. It's a truly gruesome, drawn-out death, where the very attempt to save your life unwittingly seals your fate. Scholarly debates still rage about the true efficacy of Roman medical treatments, with some arguing that patient survival was often despite rather than because of the interventions. Let's talk about medication. Roman physicians used a vast array of substances, many derived from plants, minerals, and even animal parts. Some, like willow bark for pain relief, had genuine medicinal properties. But many others were inert, ineffective, or worse, outright poisonous. You're suffering from stomach pains, and the medicus prescribes a concoction. It might contain lead, mercury, or arsenic, common ingredients in ancient remedies, often misunderstood for their therapeutic value. You drink it, trusting that it will cure you, but instead, you begin to experience new, horrifying symptoms: severe nausea, vomiting, internal bleeding, kidney failure. Your body slowly succumbs to the cumulative effects of the poison, believing it to be a cure. It's a terrifying thought, being poisoned by the very person trying to heal you, a tragic testament to the limits of ancient knowledge. And what about dentistry? Forget the gentle drill and local anesthetic. If you had a toothache in ancient Rome, your options were limited and agonizing. Perhaps the tooth was extracted, often by a barber, using crude forceps. Imagine the brute force required: the shattering of bone, the tearing of gums, all without pain relief. If the tooth was infected, the procedure could spread the infection throughout your jaw, leading to abscesses, swelling, and a painful path to sepsis that could, again, be fatal. You'd be left with a gaping, bleeding hole in your mouth, and if you were unlucky, a spreading infection that would eventually claim your life. It's enough to make you appreciate your modern dentist. Right. This makes you realize that even a simple trip to the dentist for a cavity back then could turn into a death sentence. The Romans also had a fascination with various forms of cures that involved strange rituals or ingesting rather unconventional substances. Perhaps you're suffering from epilepsy. A Roman physician might prescribe drinking the blood of a freshly killed gladiator, believing it would transfer their strength and vitality to you, or perhaps you'd be advised to wear an amulet made from the bone of a sacrificed animal. While these might seem harmless or simply superstitious, imagine the potential for disease transmission from consuming raw blood, or the lack of real treatment while relying on ineffective charms. You might cling to these desperate hopes, only to find your condition worsening, leaving you to a slow and agonizing decline, your body racked by seizures, until death finally brings release. It's a grim reminder that hope, without knowledge, can be a dangerous thing. Consider the pervasive lack of hygiene in Roman medical settings. A doctor might perform a procedure, then move on to the next patient without washing his hands or sterilizing his tools. This simple fact meant that infections, easily spread from one patient to another, were rampant. You might go in for a minor cut, only to contract a deadly infection from the instruments themselves, or from the unwashed hands of the person treating you. Your wound would fester, turn black, and spread, until gangrene set in. The stench of decaying flesh would fill the air around you as your body fought a losing battle against the unseen enemy. It's a slow, painful process of decay, leading to an inevitable, agonizing end. This widespread lack of understanding of microbial life meant that even well-intentioned medical care often became a vector for disease. Then there was the Roman fascination with purges and emetics. Believing that illness was caused by impurities in the body, physicians would often prescribe powerful laxatives and emetics to induce vomiting and diarrhea, hoping to expel the offending substances. While a mild purge might be harmless, repeated or overly aggressive treatments could lead to severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, and even organ failure. You'd be locked in a desperate battle with your own body, expelling everything you consumed until you became too weak to fight any longer. It's a truly miserable way to go, your body ravaged by the very cure meant to save you. One wonders if the Roman patients ever felt like they were being experimented on, though they likely had little choice but to trust the medicus. Even childbirth, a natural process, was fraught with extreme danger in ancient Rome. The mortality rate for both mothers and infants was staggeringly high. Without modern pain relief, sterile environments, or the ability to perform complex emergency procedures like C-sections safely, childbirth could easily become a death sentence. Imagine the terror of a difficult labor, prolonged for hours or even days, with the constant threat of hemorrhage, infection, or a fatal complication for both mother and child. If the birth was complicated, Perhaps the baby was in the wrong position. There was little the midwives or physicians could do. You'd suffer excruciating pain. And then, if you were unlucky, succumb to blood loss or a postpartum infection, your life, and perhaps that of your child, would be extinguished in the most intimate and vulnerable of moments. It's a stark reminder of the fragile line between life and death in a world without advanced medical care. This fact highlights the immense resilience, but also the constant peril faced by Roman women. Finally, consider the general lack of effective pain management. Chronic pain from injuries, illnesses, or degenerative conditions would have been a constant companion for many Romans. While they had some remedies like opium, these were often crude and inconsistent in their effects. Imagine living with debilitating pain day after day, year after year, with no real hope of relief. The constant agony would wear you down, eroding your will to live, eventually leading to a slow, internal collapse. While not an immediate, dramatic death, it's a form of extended suffering that often led to an earlier demise, either directly from the underlying condition or simply from the sheer exhaustion of enduring relentless pain. You'd simply fade away, your spirit broken by unending torment. You've navigated the treacherous medical landscape of ancient Rome, hopefully avoiding the more hands-on approaches to healing. But even if you were miraculously healthy, a force far more ancient and immense than any disease or collapsing building could strike you down, nature itself. While Rome stood as a testament to human engineering and ambition, it was always at the mercy of the earth's unpredictable fury. And when nature decided to remind the Romans who was truly in charge, the results were often catastrophic, claiming lives in ways that were both swift and utterly merciless. Imagine yourself in the year 79 AD, perhaps a merchant visiting the bustling port city of Pompeii, or a prosperous citizen enjoying your villa in Herculaneum. The air feels strangely still, almost oppressive. There have been tremors for days, small shakes that rattle the crockery but cause little alarm. After all, earthquakes are common in this region, aren't they? You go about your daily life, perhaps admiring the vivid frescoes in a friend's home, or haggling over the price of fish in the market. Then, without warning, the ground beneath your feet lurches violently. A deafening roar echoes from Mount Vesuvius, the seemingly dormant mountain looming over the bay. Suddenly, the sky darkens, not with clouds, but with a terrifying column of ash and pumice. You instinctively look up, perhaps shielding your eyes, as the first lightweight stones begin to rain down. At first, it's merely annoying, then painful. As the hail intensifies, panic erupts. People scream, pushing and shoving, trying to find shelter. You try to run, but the air becomes thick with volcanic dust, burning your lungs, making it impossible to breathe. The pumice stones grow larger, heavier, pelting you with brutal force. You might be struck unconscious by a substantial rock, your life extinguished in an instant. Or perhaps you manage to find shelter, only to be buried alive as the ash accumulates rapidly, meters deep in just a few hours. The sheer volume of material suffocates you, presses down on you until your body is encased, perfectly preserved in your final agony. A chilling testament to nature's power. This was no quick death for many. It was a terrifying suffocation, a slow entombment. For those in Herculaneum, the end was even more instantaneous, if equally awful. After the initial ashfall, a pyroclastic flow, a superheated, fast-moving wave of gas and volcanic debris, swept down the mountain. Imagine a sudden, searing blast of air, thousands of degrees hot, vaporizing everything in its path. Your body would be instantly incinerated. Your brain boiled. Your flesh turned to ash in a fraction of a second. This incredibly swift and brutal end left little behind, often only skeletal remains, frozen in their final, desperate moments. Archaeologists continue to uncover new details about the last moments of Vesuvius's victims. constantly refining our understanding of these horrific events. But volcanic eruptions weren't the only natural threat. Consider the terrifying power of flooding. The Tiber River, the very lifeblood of Rome, was also its perennial nemesis. Throughout Roman history, the Tiber was infamous for its unpredictable and often devastating floods. You live in a low-lying part of the city, perhaps near the Campus Martius. It's been raining heavily for days. The sky a bruised gray, the river, usually a placid brown, is now a swollen, churning torrent, its waters rising steadily. You start to move your belongings to higher ground, but the speed of the flood catches you by surprise. Suddenly, the river bursts its banks. A wave of murky, cold water surges through the streets, engulfing everything in its path. You're swept off your feet, tumbling amidst debris, planks of wood. Even other unfortunate souls caught in the deluge. The current is powerful, dragging you under. You struggle to surface, gasping for air. But the muddy water fills your lungs. You might be slammed against a building or carried away by the powerful current, battered and bruised, until you finally drown. Your body carried downstream to be discovered days later, if at all. Or perhaps you're trapped in your home, the waters rising relentlessly, forcing you to climb to the upper floors, then the roof, until there's nowhere left to go. You watch in horror as your city is submerged, your neighbors crying out for help, until the cold water finally engulfs you, a chilling, watery grave in the heart of the eternal city. These floods were not just destructive, they were also sources of disease. As stagnant, contaminated water lingered long after the main deluge. Earthquakes, even those less dramatic than Vesuvius, were a constant low-level threat. You might be enjoying a meal in a busy tavern when the ground begins to shake violently. The walls crack, plaster rains down, and the heavy ceiling timbers begin to splinter. Panic ensues. People rush for the doors, but the exit is blocked by falling debris. You could be crushed by collapsing masonry, or impaled by falling beams. The sheer force of the tremor sends you tumbling, disoriented, as the building implodes around you. You might be buried alive. Your final moments spent in darkness and terror, listening to the groans of the dying around you. The city, so grand and imposing, could turn into a death trap in mere seconds, a cruel reminder of the Earth's tectonic power. Beyond these sudden, cataclysmic events, there were the slower, more insidious natural dangers. Consider the threat of drought and famine. While Rome had sophisticated grain supplies from Egypt and North Africa, these could be interrupted by storms at sea, political instability, or prolonged periods of drought in the provinces. You would experience the gradual, agonizing effects of starvation. First, hunger pangs, then weakness, lethargy. Your body would begin to consume its own muscle and fat. Your immune system would weaken, making you susceptible to any passing illness. Children and the elderly would be particularly vulnerable, their small bodies unable to withstand the deprivation. You might find yourself too weak to even move, lying in a bed, your skin stretched over your bones, until death finally releases you from the gnawing emptiness. This wasn't a quick death, but a slow, humiliating surrender to the most basic of human needs. Even the weather itself could be a killer. Severe blizzards, though rare in Rome, could paralyze the city, leading to hypothermia for the poor and homeless, who had little protection from the elements. Scorching summer heat waves could lead to heat stroke, especially for those toiling under the sun in the fields or constructing massive public works. You'd feel dizzy, disoriented, your body overheating, until you collapsed, your internal organs shutting down. These were not the dramatic deaths of legend, but the quiet, agonizing ends brought about by the relentless forces of climate, proving that even a powerful empire was vulnerable to the simplest of environmental factors. Perhaps one of the most overlooked natural dangers was the presence of wild animals. While wolves were largely driven from the immediate vicinity of Rome, bears, wild boars, and even venomous snakes were a threat in the surrounding countryside, and sometimes even ventured closer to the city. If you were a shepherd, a farmer, or simply traveling through the wilds, an encounter with a territorial boar or a cornered bear could mean a swift, brutal mauling. You'd suffer horrific injuries, bleed out, or succumb to infection from the wounds. And while less dramatic, a snake bite could be equally fatal, especially if the snake was venomous and no effective antidote was available. Your body would swell, your breathing would become labored, and paralysis might set in before your heart finally gave out. Historians still debate the true prevalence of fatal animal attacks on humans within Roman territories, as records often focused on more significant events. Ultimately, the Romans, despite their engineering prowess and their mastery over much of the known world, lived in constant awareness of their fragile existence in the face of nature's indifference. You might build aqueducts and colosseums, but a single tremor, a torrential downpour, or a plume of ash could turn your world upside down in an instant, proving that no amount of human ingenuity could truly conquer the raw power of the earth. You've dodged falling buildings, endured dubious medical treatments, and even survived the occasional wrath of Vesuvius. Impressive. But now, let's consider a more insidious, yet equally deadly, threat that lurked in the very essence of Roman daily life: the dangers of food and drink. While the Roman diet is often lauded for its simplicity and health, the realities of ancient food production, preservation, and consumption meant that your next meal or drink could, quite literally, be your last. Imagine you're at a lavish Roman banquet, a guest in the opulent home of a wealthy senator. Dishes are brought out in a seemingly endless procession: roasted meats, exotic fruits, and an abundance of rich sauces. You feast, indulging in the delights, perhaps sipping on a fine wine. But what you don't realize is the hidden danger lurking beneath the surface of this apparent indulgence. One of the most insidious poisons in ancient Rome was lead. It was ubiquitous. Roman aqueducts, while marvels of engineering, often lined their pipes with lead. Cookware, especially vessels used to reduce fruit juices into sweet syrups known as defrutum, or sapa, were frequently made of lead or contained lead solder. This process actually enhanced the sweetness and preservation of the syrups, which were then used to sweeten wine, flavor food, and even as a cosmetic. So, as you sip that delightfully sweet wine, or enjoy a dish seasoned with that rich fruit syrup, you are slowly, incrementally, ingesting lead. Over time, this cumulative exposure would lead to lead poisoning. You might first experience subtle symptoms: chronic fatigue, abdominal pain, and constipation. As the lead accumulates, the symptoms would worsen: muscle weakness, nerve damage leading to tremors, cognitive decline, and agonizing joint pain. Your mind might cloud, your body would waste away, and eventually, your organs would simply fail. It's a slow, agonizing descent into madness and paralysis, a truly awful way to die. All while believing you were enjoying the finest culinary delights Rome had to offer. Historians still debate the true impact of lead poisoning on the Roman aristocracy and their overall health, with some arguing it contributed to the decline of the elite. Beyond lead, consider the rudimentary methods of food preservation. Without refrigeration, food spoiled quickly, especially in Rome's warm climate. Meat and fish were salted, dried, or smoked. But these methods weren't foolproof. Imagine purchasing some salted fish from the market. It might look and smell fine, but unbeknownst to you, it could be contaminated with bacteria. You consume it, and within hours, you're racked with violent stomach cramps, nausea, and incessant vomiting. This could be food poisoning in its most immediate and brutal form. If the bacteria produced toxins, You could suffer from paralysis, respiratory failure, or septic shock. Death could be swift and agonizing, your body violently purging itself before finally giving up. It's a truly awful, undignified end, brought about by a simple meal intended to nourish you. And what about the cleanliness of Roman water? While the aqueducts brought fresh water into the city, its storage and distribution within the sprawling urban environment were far from sterile. Stagnant pools, contaminated wells, and cross-contamination with sewage systems were constant threats, especially in the poorer districts. You drink what you believe is clean water, only to find yourself afflicted with dysentery or cholera. These waterborne diseases would cause severe dehydration through relentless diarrhea and vomiting. Your body would rapidly lose fluids, your strength would drain away, and your organs would begin to shut down. You'd suffer unimaginable discomfort and weakness, eventually collapsing as your body gives up the fight against relentless fluid loss. This wasn't a sudden, dramatic death, but a gradual, horrifying weakening until you simply fade away. Even common foodstuffs could be deadly if misidentified or mishandled. Wild mushrooms, for example, were part of the Roman diet, but without expert knowledge. Distinguishing between edible and highly poisonous varieties was a perilous gamble. Imagine foraging for mushrooms in the countryside, intending to add them to your evening meal. You gather what you believe to be a harmless edible variety, cook them, and serve them to your family. Within hours, agonizing abdominal pain, liver failure, and kidney damage set in. You and your family would suffer a truly horrific, protracted death. Your internal organs slowly shutting down. All from a simple, innocent-looking fungi. This is why you sometimes hear those old jokes about Roman emperors being wary of gifts of mushrooms. Consider also the dangers of adulterated food. Merchants, driven by profit, would often stretch expensive ingredients with cheaper, sometimes toxic, alternatives. Flour could be mixed with chalk, lead, or even plaster to increase volume. Wine could be enhanced with various additives, some of which were poisonous, to improve flavor, color, or preservation. You might consume these adulterated products unknowingly, experiencing chronic low-level poisoning over time, similar to lead exposure, leading to a slow decline in health and eventual organ failure. Or, in a more acute case, a particularly toxic additive could bring about rapid and painful symptoms, leading to a swift demise. It's a cruel irony that the very sustenance meant to sustain life could be cunningly engineered to end it. Even simple overindulgence could be fatal, especially among the wealthy elite. While not a poison in the traditional sense, continuous, excessive consumption of rich foods, coupled with a sedentary lifestyle, led to widespread health issues, gout, obesity, and heart disease were common among the Roman aristocracy. While these weren't acute causes of death in the same way as a knife wound, they contributed to a shorter, less healthy life, eventually culminating in a demise that, while perhaps less dramatic, was certainly awful in its prolonged suffering. You might experience agonizing pain in your joints, shortness of breath, and a general decline in your physical capabilities, until your heart simply gave out under the strain. One could argue that the Roman feast, while a symbol of power, was also a slow-acting poison for the wealthy. Finally, think about what happened when food supplies ran low. Rome, a massive urban center, was entirely dependent on continuous grain shipments from its provinces. Any disruption, whether from bad harvests, pirate activity, or political unrest, could lead to severe famine. We touched upon this in the context of natural disasters, but the vulnerability of Rome's food supply chain was a constant, man-made threat. You would witness the slow, agonizing starvation of your city. People would grow desperate, resorting to eating anything they could find, even things that were dangerous or inedible. You would see your neighbors weaken, their bodies becoming skeletal, their eyes hollow with hunger. This is a death of absolute despair, where the body's last reserves are consumed. and the only thoughts are of food. Until finally, consciousness fades into the blessed relief of nothingness. This truly horrific scenario, a constant underlying fear for the urban poor, underscores the fragility of life in a metropolis dependent on distant lands for its very survival. You've bravely navigated the culinary minefields and survived the fickle hand of nature in ancient Rome. Your senses have been assaulted by the sights, sounds, and smells of a bustling, dangerous city. But let's delve deeper into the very air you breathe and the ground you walk on, to discover the silent killers lurking in the city's crowded streets and unsanitary conditions. These weren't dramatic ends, but rather insidious, often invisible threats that slowly, relentlessly, eroded the lives of countless Romans, leading to agonizing and undignified demises. Imagine you're living in one of Rome's bustling insulae, perhaps on the ground floor. The streets outside are narrow and perpetually damp, often flowing with a mix of rainwater, discarded waste, and animal refuse. The air is heavy with the stench of human waste, rotting food, and the mingled odors of thousands of unwashed bodies. This pervasive lack of sanitation created a breeding ground for diseases that, to the Romans, were simply part of life, but to you, would be horrifying. One of the most insidious threats was malaria. Rome was built on and around marshy areas, particularly the low-lying plains around the Tiber. These swamps were ideal breeding grounds for mosquitoes, which carried the malarial parasite. You'd feel it first as a sudden chill, then a burning fever, followed by profuse sweating. These cycles would repeat every few days, leaving you utterly debilitated. While malaria didn't always kill quickly, chronic infection would leave you weak, anemic, and highly susceptible to other illnesses. You'd suffer from an enlarged spleen, persistent headaches, and a general wasting away of your body. It's a debilitating, slow-motion death, punctuated by recurrent, agonizing fevers, until your body, weakened beyond repair, simply succumbs. Archaeological evidence, particularly skeletal remains, strongly suggests malaria was a significant cause of death and debility across all social strata in ancient Rome, though its exact prevalence is still debated. Then there was the constant threat of tuberculosis. In Rome's crowded tenements, where multiple families might share small, poorly ventilated rooms, airborne diseases spread with terrifying efficiency. You'd start with a persistent cough, perhaps a slight fever in the evenings. As the disease progressed, the cough would become more severe, producing blood-streaked sputum. You'd experience night sweats, extreme weight loss, and a gradual wasting away. Your lungs would slowly be consumed, making every breath an effort, until you finally suffocated, your body emaciated and racked with a relentless cough. It's a truly awful, drawn-out death, isolating you as your illness progressed. The shame and fear of contagion pushing others away. Smallpox and measles were also rampant, sweeping through the city in devastating epidemics. Imagine watching as your neighbors, your family, succumb to these terrifying diseases. You'd develop a high fever, followed by a rash of painful, fluid-filled blisters that would cover your entire body. If you survived the initial fever, the scabs would leave disfiguring scars, but many didn't. You'd suffer from intense pain, delirium, and often blindness before death finally claimed you. The outbreaks would decimate populations, leaving behind a trail of grief and fear. The lack of understanding about contagion meant that quarantines were ineffective or non-existent, allowing these diseases to rage unchecked through the dense urban population. Even something as seemingly benign as your daily ablutions could be dangerous. Public latrines, while a social hub, were also incredibly unsanitary. You'd sit on a communal bench over an open sewer, sharing a sponge on a stick for wiping. The stench would be overpowering, and the risk of contracting diseases from fecal matter was astronomical. Intestinal parasites were incredibly common, weakening the body and leaving it vulnerable to other infections. You might experience chronic diarrhea, malnutrition, and a general decline in health, slowly wasting away from constant parasitic infestation. It's a truly undignified and quietly agonizing demise, brought about by the very act of trying to maintain hygiene in an unhygienic world. And what about the waste itself? Rome had a sophisticated sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, but it was often overwhelmed, and not all areas were connected. Piles of refuse, both human and animal, would accumulate in the streets, attracting rats and other vermin. These animals, in turn, carried fleas, which could transmit diseases like the bubonic plague. While major plague epidemics were less frequent in early Roman history compared to the later empire, localized outbreaks of similar pestilences were certainly possible. Imagine developing sudden, agonizingly swollen lymph nodes buboes in your groin or armpits, accompanied by a high fever, chills, and delirium. The disease would progress rapidly, leading to internal bleeding, gangrene, and organ failure. It's a horrific, swift death, often with terrifying symptoms that left little doubt about the sheer brutality of the illness. Even seemingly minor irritations could become fatal in Rome's unsanitary environment. A simple cut or scrape on your foot from walking barefoot or in flimsy sandals could quickly become infected. Without antibiotics, a localized infection could rapidly spread throughout your body, leading to cellulitis, abscesses, and ultimately, sepsis. Your limb would swell, become red and painful, with streaks of infection tracking up your arm or leg. You'd experience chills, fever, and eventually a crashing blood pressure as your body goes into septic shock. It's a rapid and terrifying decline, your body overwhelmed by bacterial toxins, leading to organ failure and death. This is why even a small injury in ancient Rome was a potential death sentence. The constant inhalation of smoke from cooking fires, heating braziers, and industrial activities like blacksmithing and pottery would have taken a toll on the lungs of Roman citizens, particularly those living in crowded, poorly ventilated spaces. Imagine suffering from chronic respiratory illnesses, a persistent cough, and shortness of breath, slowly deteriorating over years. This isn't an acute death, but a slow, agonizing suffocation as your lungs become scarred and damaged. Reducing your capacity to breathe with each passing day, you would gradually weaken, your energy sapped, until your body could no longer sustain itself. It's a quiet, drawn-out suffering, exacerbated by the polluted air that was a constant companion in the Roman urban landscape. The Roman fascination with public spectacle also brought its own silent killers. The animal fights, for instance, introduced exotic beasts into the city, some of which could carry diseases. More commonly, the sheer density of crowds at the Colosseum or the Circus Maximus created ideal conditions for the rapid spread of airborne illnesses. You'd be packed shoulder to shoulder with thousands of others, breathing the same air, sharing any coughs or sneezes that might be circulating. A new strain of influenza or a particularly virulent cold could rip through the audience, leaving many dead in its wake. This is a subtle danger, often overlooked, but the very act of communal gathering could transform an ordinary cold into a mass casualty event. This raises an interesting point of academic debate. How much did Roman leisure activities contribute to disease transmission, beyond the obvious risks of the arena? In essence, living in ancient Rome was a constant battle against an invisible army of microorganisms. Every breath, every meal, every interaction carried an inherent risk. You might not have faced a gladiator in the arena, but you were constantly fighting for your life against microscopic adversaries. An exhausting, silent war that most Romans eventually lost, often in the most undignified and agonizing ways imaginable. You've managed to survive the invisible dangers lurking in Rome's cramped alleys and the insidious threats in your very diet. Now, prepare yourself for perhaps the most brutal and direct forms of demise: the cold, unyielding hand of Roman justice, punishment, and execution. While the empire prided itself on its sophisticated legal system, the consequences for breaking the law, or even just upsetting the wrong person, could be shockingly severe, leading to ends that were often public, painful, and designed to instill terror. Imagine you're accused of a crime, perhaps petty theft, or maybe something far more serious like treason against the emperor. You're dragged before a magistrate, the air thick with the murmur of the crowd and the stern voices of the officials. The Roman legal process, while possessing elements of due process, could also be swift and merciless, especially for the lower classes. If found guilty, your fate would depend heavily on your social status and the severity of your crime. But for many, the outcome was horrifyingly clear. Consider the punishment of crucifixion. This wasn't just a means of execution. It was a public spectacle designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation, and to serve as a stark warning to others. You're led through the crowded streets, perhaps scourged first, your back raw and bleeding, the jeers and shouts of the mob ringing in your ears. You are then nailed or tied to a large wooden cross, often left to hang naked, exposed to the elements. The pain would be excruciating. Every breath a struggle as your lungs slowly filled with fluid. You would hang there for hours, perhaps even days, succumbing to exhaustion, dehydration, blood loss, and asphyxiation. Birds might peck at your wounds, and you'd slowly fade from consciousness, your body racked with torment, until death finally brings release. It's a truly awful, prolonged agony, the ultimate public shaming, designed to break not just the body, but the spirit. Scholars have extensively analyzed the physical and psychological toll of crucifixion, emphasizing its unique brutality as a form of capital punishment. Then there was the terrifying punishment of being thrown to the wild beasts in the arena, known as damnatio ad bestias. This was often reserved for criminals deemed particularly heinous, or for those who refused to renounce their faith. Like early Christians, you'd be led into the vast, roaring arena, the roar of the crowd deafening, the smell of blood and sweat thick in the air. The gates would open, and out would charge a lion, a bear, or perhaps a pack of hungry dogs, specially trained and starved for the spectacle. You would have no weapon, no defense. Your final moments would be a terrifying, desperate struggle against a powerful, savage beast, ending in a brutal mauling. Your body torn apart for the entertainment of the masses. It's a terrifyingly swift and violent death, utterly devoid of dignity, a horrifying display of human vulnerability against raw animal power. For those convicted of specific crimes, the punishments could be uniquely agonizing. Take, for instance, the puinacule, or punishment of the sack, reserved for parricide, the murder of a parent or close relative. You'd be sewn into a leather sack with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, then thrown into the Tiber River. Imagine the claustrophobia, the terror of being trapped with struggling, frantic animals. As the sack fills with water, you'd drown, but not before being bitten, scratched, and clawed by the terrified creatures trapped with you. It's a truly bizarre and horrific death, a macabre ritual designed to reflect the unnaturalness of the crime, a chilling testament to Roman ideas of justice. Even seemingly less severe punishments could be lethal. If you were a soldier found guilty of desertion or cowardice, you might face decimation, a brutal form of group punishment. 1 in 10 soldiers would be selected by lot, then clubbed or stoned to death by their own comrades. Imagine the terror of the lottery, the agonizing wait to see if you were chosen, and then the horrific reality of being beaten to death by the very men you served alongside. It's a horrifying, intimate betrayal, a death inflicted by your peers, a cold reminder of the unforgiving discipline of the Roman legions. Historians still debate the frequency of decimation in Roman military history, but its very existence as a deterrent speaks volumes about Roman military discipline. Then there was the practice of beheading, often for higher-ranking criminals or those with Roman citizenship. as it was considered a more honorable and less drawn-out form of execution than crucifixion. While theoretically quicker, imagine the terror of kneeling, your head on a block, waiting for the executioner's axe. A clumsy blow, a momentary hesitation, and it wouldn't be instant. You could suffer a botched decapitation, a prolonged agony as the axe bites into your neck repeatedly before finally severing your head. Even if swift, the moment of pure, unadulterated terror before the blade falls would be an awful, unforgettable end. Even outside formal executions, the Roman state could be incredibly brutal. If you were a political dissident, an enemy of the state, or simply someone who had fallen out of favor with a powerful figure, you might find yourself subjected to forced suicide. While seemingly a choice, it was often a thinly veiled execution, with the alternative being public torture and execution. Imagine being presented with a dagger, or a cup of poison, and told to end your own life to spare your family from ruin, or to preserve some shred of dignity. The psychological torment of making that final decision, the grim awareness that you are actively choosing your own demise, would be an awful internal struggle, leading to a death that was self-inflicted but state-mandated. And for those who simply couldn't afford to pay their debts, or those captured in war, there was the terrifying reality of slavery. While not always a direct cause of death, the brutal conditions of slavery often led to an early, agonizing end. You could be forced to toil in the mines, breathing in toxic dust, suffering from lung diseases, and collapsing from exhaustion. Or you might be sent to work on a large agricultural estate, chained to other slaves, working under the scorching sun, whipped for any perceived slacking, until your body simply gave out from starvation, exhaustion, or infection from untreated wounds. It's a slow, grinding death, stripped of all humanity, where your life holds no value beyond the labor you can provide. Finally, consider the concept of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. While not a physical death, for someone in Roman society, the complete erasure of your name, your image, and your very existence from public record could be a form of social death, a chilling punishment for those who defied the powerful. Your statues would be toppled, your inscriptions chiseled away, your name removed from public documents. It's an awful, psychological annihilation, a death of your legacy, a fate worse than physical death for many ambitious Romans. The sheer variety and brutality of Roman punishments underscore a society that understood the power of fear and public spectacle in maintaining order. Your demise, if it came at the hands of Roman justice, would not only be painful but deeply symbolic. A grim lesson for all who witnessed it. You've narrowly escaped the grim judgment of Roman law and the spectacle of the arena. But even if you were free, unaccused, and in good health, the very foundation of Roman society, its immense infrastructure and agricultural might, was built on the backs of those with the least power, laborers and slaves. Their lives were often brutal, short, and incredibly cheap, ending in ways that were seldom glorious but always awful. A constant churn of human suffering beneath the veneer of Roman grandeur. Imagine you are a slave, captured in a recent war, or perhaps born into bondage. Your life is not your own. You are property, a living tool for your master's will. Your fate is entirely dependent on his temperament, his needs, and the specific labor he assigns you. And often, that labor would lead directly or indirectly to a swift and miserable end. Consider the horrors of the Roman mines. If you were condemned to work in these mines, whether for silver, lead, copper, or marble, your life expectancy plummeted. You would be lowered into dark, cramped, suffocating tunnels, lit only by flickering oil lamps. The air would be thick with dust, silica dust from rock, or toxic fumes from smelting ores. You would spend your days chiseling rock, hauling heavy loads, or tending to furnaces, all under the lash of an overseer. Your lungs would slowly fill with dust, leading to silicosis, a slow, agonizing suffocation as your respiratory system failed. You'd cough incessantly, struggling for every breath, until your body wasted away. But even before that, accidents were rampant. Imagine a tunnel collapsing, burying you alive under tons of rock, or a sudden rockfall, crushing your limbs or your skull in an instant. The lack of proper ventilation could also lead to carbon monoxide poisoning from lamps, or simply asphyxiation in stale air. You'd be worked to exhaustion, malnourished, and dehydrated, making you prone to mistakes that could lead to fatal accidents for yourself or others. Your body, already weakened by chronic illness and brutal conditions, would simply give out. It's a truly awful, dark, and dehumanizing end, where your existence was literally consumed by the earth's depths for the empire's wealth. Historians often emphasize that Roman mines were essentially death traps, with little regard for the safety of the enslaved workforce. And archaeological evidence from mining sites supports this grim assessment. If you weren't sent to the mines, perhaps your fate was the galleys. As a condemned criminal or a captured enemy, you might find yourself chained to an oar on a Roman warship. Imagine the stench of hundreds of unwashed bodies in a confined space, the constant rocking of the ship, the merciless sun beating down on you, or the biting cold of the open sea. You would row for hours, days, driven by the whip of the taskmaster, with little food or fresh water. The exhaustion would be relentless. Your hands would blister and bleed, your muscles would cramp, and your body would become emaciated. Death in the galleys could come in many forms. During a storm, the ship might capsize, dragging you to a watery grave, chained to your oar, with no hope of escape. Or perhaps a naval battle would erupt, and your ship would be rammed or set alight, leaving you to burn or drown. Even without such dramatic events, you would suffer from dehydration, starvation, or succumb to rampant diseases like scurvy or dysentery, which would sweep through the confined spaces of the ship. Your body would weaken, your mind would cloud, until you simply slumped over your oar, dead, your corpse unceremoniously tossed overboard. It's a truly awful, claustrophobic, and utterly dehumanizing death at sea, where your purpose was simply to provide raw power for the Roman war machine. Agricultural slavery was less dramatic than the mines or galleys, but no less brutal. If you were destined for a latifundium, a vast Roman estate, you would spend your days toiling in the fields from dawn till dusk, under the scorching Italian sun. You'd be involved in planting, harvesting, olive pressing, or grape crushing. The work was backbreaking, monotonous, and relentlessly physically demanding. Malnutrition, exposure to the elements, and inadequate rest were common. You might collapse from heat stroke in the summer, your body overheating, your organs shutting down under the relentless sun. Or in winter, succumb to hypothermia from exposure, your body freezing as you labored in the cold. Injuries from farming tools, scythes, hoes, plows, were frequent and often led to fatal infections without proper medical care. A simple cut could turn gangrenous, leading to a slow, agonizing death. You would be constantly supervised by a villicous overseer, often himself a slave, who would not hesitate to use the whip to ensure maximum productivity. Your existence would be a constant cycle of toil and suffering, until your body, worn out and broken, simply gave up. It's a truly awful grinding demise, a slow erasure of your humanity under the relentless burden of labor. Even skilled urban slaves, though perhaps better fed and housed than their rural counterparts, faced significant dangers. They might be forced into dangerous trades, like construction, working on high scaffolding without safety equipment. A misstep, a falling beam, and you would plummet to your death, a crumpled heap on the Roman pavement. Or perhaps you were a slave involved in the dangerous Roman industries, like glassblowing, constantly exposed to extreme heat, or working in fulleries, which used human urine for cleaning clothes, exposing workers to ammonia fumes and other irritants. Your health would slowly deteriorate, your lungs scarred, your skin irritated, until your body could no longer cope. Scholarly discussion often highlights the stark contrast between the lives of well-treated household slaves and the brutal existence of those in mines or agriculture, though even the former could face arbitrary cruelty. And then there was the raw, arbitrary violence. As a slave, you were completely at the mercy of your master. He could beat you, torture you, or even kill you with impunity. If you displeased him, if you broke something valuable, if you simply looked at him the wrong way, your life could be forfeit in an instant. Imagine being whipped to death for a minor transgression, your body flayed open, bleeding out in a public square as a warning to other slaves, or perhaps being thrown to the fish in a master's pond, a perverse form of entertainment, a terrifying end by being eaten alive. It's a truly horrifying thought, to have your life ended not by justice or illness, but by the casual cruelty of another human being who owned you. Even for Roman citizens, certain forms of labor were incredibly dangerous. Construction workers, for example, building those massive aqueducts, temples, and roads, faced significant risks. Imagine working on a towering arch, high above the ground, with crude scaffolding and no safety nets. A gust of wind, a misplaced stone, or a moment of dizziness could send you plunging to your death below, your body shattered on the unyielding stone. Or perhaps you were a quarry worker, extracting massive blocks of stone, constantly under the threat of falling rock or crushing machinery. These were hard, brutal lives, often ending in sudden, violent accidents, far from any battlefield glory. In Roman society, the lives of laborers and slaves were expendable. Their suffering was largely invisible to the powerful, their deaths unmourned beyond their immediate circles. Your existence, if you were one of these unfortunate souls, was a testament to the brutal realities of an empire built on the exploitation of human bodies. And your demise would often be as cheap and undignified as your life. You've managed to avoid the backbreaking toil and arbitrary cruelty that befell countless laborers and slaves. A small victory, perhaps. But in the rarefied air of Roman power, another, equally potent, and often more dramatic, source of death existed: political intrigue and violent ends. For those who climbed to the pinnacles of Roman society, emperors, senators, generals, life was often a treacherous tightrope walk, where a wrong word, a shifting alliance, or a moment of perceived weakness could lead to a swift, brutal, and often public demise, orchestrated by those closest to them. Imagine you are a powerful senator, a seasoned politician, or even an emperor. You navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics, surrounded by sycophants, rivals, and ambitious family members. Every dinner party could be a conspiracy in disguise. Every whispered conversation a potential plot. The methods of dispatching political adversaries were as varied as they were ruthless, often designed to appear accidental or self-inflicted, but universally understood for what they were. Consider the classic Roman method of poisoning. This was a favored tool for eliminating rivals quietly, leaving little trace. You might be at a grand feast, celebrating a political triumph, when a trusted slave brings you a cup of wine, or a particularly succulent piece of meat. You consume it, unaware that it has been subtly laced with a potent, fast-acting toxin. Within minutes, you might feel a sudden, agonizing pain in your stomach, followed by convulsions, vomiting, and a rapid descent into unconsciousness. Your body would betray you, racked with internal bleeding and organ failure, until you finally succumb, your face contorted in agony. The beauty of this method, for the perpetrator, was its often discreet nature, allowing them to feign sorrow while silently celebrating your demise. Historians still debate the true prevalence of poisoning in Roman politics, with many recorded deaths attributed to natural causes perhaps being veiled assassinations. Then there was the ever-present threat of assassination by dagger. This was the more overt, visceral method, often employed when a quick, definitive statement was required. Imagine you are walking through the forum, perhaps attending a Senate meeting, surrounded by your retinue. Suddenly, out of the bustling crowd, a cloaked figure lunges, A glint of steel flashes, and you feel a searing pain. The blade plunges into your back, your side, your chest, again and again. You fall, gasping, bleeding out onto the sacred Roman ground, your life draining away amidst the chaos and screams. Your assassination would be a public spectacle, a bloody message sent to all who dared to oppose the conspirators. The most famous example, of course, is Julius Caesar, stabbed multiple times by a cabal of senators. A grim reminder that even the most powerful could be brought down by a well-coordinated plot. For emperors, the threat was often from their own Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers ostensibly sworn to protect them. These guards, powerful and often venal, could easily be swayed by bribes or promises of power. Imagine you are the emperor, secluded in your palace, feeling a sense of false security. Suddenly, your trusted guards burst into your chambers, their faces grim, their swords drawn. There's no discussion, no trial, just a swift, brutal end. You might be stabbed repeatedly, your body left in a pool of blood on the marble floor of your own palace. Or perhaps you'd be strangled, silently, effectively. Your last breath stolen by the very men meant to protect you. This intimate betrayal, a death at the hands of those closest to you, was a tragically common fate for many Roman emperors. A chilling testament to the dangers of absolute power. Beyond physical violence, there was the calculated cruelty of forced suicide. As we touched upon earlier, this was a common demand for those who had fallen out of favor with the emperor or a powerful faction. Imagine you are a brilliant general or a renowned philosopher who has attracted the emperor's suspicion or jealousy. You receive a polite but firm message. The emperor believes it is time for you to take your own life, for the good of Rome. You know that refusal means public torture and execution, bringing disgrace upon your family. The agonizing choice, the internal torment of taking your own life to avoid a worse fate, is a psychological torture in itself. You might choose to open your veins in a warm bath, watching your lifeblood drain away, or drink a cup of hemlock, feeling your body slowly paralyze. It's a death that, while self-inflicted, is undeniably an execution, a chilling demonstration of totalitarian control over even the most personal choice. And what about the constant threat of military coups and civil wars? Roman history is littered with periods of intense political instability, where legions marched on Rome, and rival claimants to the throne plunged the empire into bloody conflict. If you were a civilian caught in such a conflict, your death might come from a stray arrow, a charging cavalryman, or simply being caught in the crossfire of street fighting. Imagine your home being ransacked, your family caught in the violence, and you are struck down by a soldier who cares nothing for your life. Even if you survived the initial conflict, the aftermath of a civil war often involved brutal purges, where perceived enemies and rivals of the new regime were systematically eliminated. You could find your name on a proscription list, meaning you were declared an outlaw, and anyone could kill you for a reward. Your property would be confiscated, and your family potentially enslaved. This was a death not just for you, but for your entire lineage, a complete erasure by the winning faction. Sometimes, the end came not from a direct attack, but from banishment and slow neglect. If you were a prominent figure who fell from grace, you might be exiled to a remote, desolate island, stripped of your wealth and influence. Imagine being cut off from all you know, left to languish in isolation, without the comforts or connections that sustained your life. You might succumb to disease, starvation, or simply despair, your body wasting away, your mind broken by loneliness and the crushing weight of your fall from power. It's a slow, psychological death, a lingering torment far from the dramatic swiftness of an assassination, but equally effective in removing a threat. Ultimately, for those at the top of the Roman hierarchy, life was a high-stakes game where the ultimate price was often your very existence. Your death would not be accidental, but meticulously planned. a calculated move in the endless game of power. It's a stark reminder that in ancient Rome, the higher you climbed, the harder, and more brutally, you could fall. This highlights the inherent dangers of unchecked power and ambition in a system often devoid of institutional checks and balances. You've skillfully navigated the treacherous currents of political intrigue, avoiding the poisoned chalice or the assassin's blade. You've outsmarted famine, fire, and even the occasional eruption of Vesuvius. Truly, you are a survivor of ancient Rome. But as we approach the twilight of our journey, let's reflect on the countless, often overlooked, ways that life itself, even if free from dramatic peril, simply wore down the human body in ancient Rome, leading to a myriad of lingering ailments and chronic suffering that culminated in a gradual, yet undeniably awful, demise. Imagine your body as a temple, but one constantly assailed by subtle, persistent enemies. The relentless physical demands of everyday life, the endemic diseases, and the limited understanding of health and aging meant that even a natural death in ancient Rome was often preceded by years of decline, pain, and disability. Consider the pervasive problem of arthritis and joint pain. Your daily life, whether you were a farmer tilling the fields, a soldier marching across vast distances, a craftsman using repetitive motions, or even an urban dweller constantly walking on hard, uneven surfaces, took an immense toll on your joints. Imagine the constant ache in your knees, the stiffness in your back, the grinding pain in your hips. As you aged, these conditions would worsen, making every movement a deliberate, agonizing effort. You'd struggle to rise from your bed, to walk more than a few steps, to even grasp objects with your gnarled fingers. This wasn't a sudden death, but a slow, continuous battle against your own failing body, leading to immobility and a dependency on others, until the sheer exhaustion of living with constant pain finally claimed you. Then there was the reality of chronic infections and untreated injuries. A seemingly minor infection, like a persistent cough or a recurring skin rash, without antibiotics, could fester for years, slowly weakening your immune system and making you susceptible to more severe illnesses. Imagine living with an untreated abscess, or a slowly spreading fungal infection, constantly draining your energy and causing discomfort. Similarly, a sprained ankle that never quite healed properly, a broken bone that set incorrectly, or a nagging back injury from a lifetime of labor would become a source of chronic pain and disability. You would limp, grimace with every movement, and find your ability to perform even simple tasks diminishing, leaving you in a state of prolonged suffering until your body simply gave out from the cumulative strain. Archaeological studies of skeletal remains frequently reveal evidence of chronic infections and healed, but often deformed, fractures, painting a grim picture of widespread physical hardship. Let's not forget the sensory decline. Your eyesight, assaulted by poor lighting, dusty conditions, and the absence of corrective lenses, would gradually dim. Imagine struggling to read, to navigate familiar streets, or to recognize faces, as your world slowly became a blur. Your hearing, constantly assailed by the din of the city, by the shouting of vendors, the clang of workshops, and the roar of the crowds, would also deteriorate. The world would become muffled, conversations a struggle, isolating you from social interaction. While not direct causes of death, these declines would chip away at your quality of life, leading to frustration, isolation, and a general erosion of your will, contributing to an overall decline that hastened the end. And what about dental decay and related infections? Roman diets, while not overly sugary, still caused tooth decay. Without modern dentistry, a simple cavity could progress to a painful abscess. Imagine the agonizing throbbing in your jaw, the swelling of your face, the difficulty eating. If the infection spread, it could lead to systemic illness, septicemia, or even, in rare cases, a brain abscess. Your teeth would rot, fall out, or become constant sources of pain, affecting your ability to chew, leading to malnutrition, and eventually, a slow decline from chronic infection and inadequate sustenance. It's a truly awful, persistent torment that would make every meal a challenge and every day a struggle. This is why you sometimes see skeletons from ancient Rome with remarkably worn teeth. They simply chewed on whatever they could for their entire lives. The omnipresent threat of parasitic infestations was another silent killer, contributing to long-term suffering and premature death, from tapeworms to roundworms. These internal parasites would sap your body of nutrients, leading to chronic malnutrition, anemia, and a weakened immune system. You'd suffer from constant fatigue, abdominal pain, and a general listlessness. While not usually fatal on their own in the short term, their presence would make you vulnerable to every passing illness, slowly draining your vitality until your body simply had nothing left to fight with. It's a truly awful, undignified, and hidden cause of suffering. Your life force slowly consumed from within. Finally, consider the pervasive issue of malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies, even if not to the point of acute famine. While Rome had a robust food supply, the diets of the poor were often monotonous and lacked variety, relying heavily on grain. Imagine suffering from rickets due to vitamin D deficiency, leading to bone deformities and weakness, or scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, leading to bleeding gums, bruising, and eventually organ failure. These deficiencies would not kill you quickly, but they would slowly erode your health, leaving you weak, vulnerable, and prone to every opportunistic infection. Your body would slowly break down, lacking the essential building blocks to repair itself, until you succumbed to an illness that a healthier body might have easily fended off. This raises a fascinating academic question. To what extent did chronic subclinical malnutrition affect the long-term health and productivity of the Roman populace? Beyond overt famine, in essence, even if you avoided the dramatic fates, living to an old age in ancient Rome was often a prolonged period of physical decay and chronic pain. Your body, constantly battling against a hostile environment, inadequate medicine, and relentless demands, would eventually wear out, leaving you to a slow, agonizing decline, a quiet surrender to the relentless march of time and the accumulated toll of a hard life. You've traversed the perilous landscape of ancient Rome, from collapsing tenements to poisoned feasts, from brutal punishments to the insidious decay of chronic illness. Your journey through the awful ways people met their end has been extensive, revealing the sheer fragility of life in an empire built on both immense power and pervasive vulnerability. As we reach our final destination, let's consider the echoes of mortality in the Eternal City, reflecting on how Romans, despite their grandeur, ultimately faced the universal truth of death in ways that resonate with both horror and a strange sense of quiet inevitability. Imagine standing on the Appian Way, lined with tombs and mausoleums, each a testament to a life lived and ultimately ended. For the Romans, death was a constant presence, interwoven into the fabric of daily life. The average lifespan was short, infant mortality horrifyingly high, and epidemics could decimate populations in a matter of weeks. This wasn't a society that could easily compartmentalize death. It was an ever-present specter, shaping their beliefs, their rituals, and their grim acceptance of fate. Consider the psychological toll of living with such constant proximity to death. You would have witnessed countless funerals, seen bodies carried through the streets, and heard the laments of the bereaved. The loss of children was particularly common, a heartbreaking reality for almost every family. Imagine the crushing grief of burying multiple offspring, knowing that each pregnancy was a roll of the dice. This constant cycle of loss would leave deep emotional scars, a pervasive undercurrent of sorrow beneath the stoicism and ambition that characterized Roman society. It's a quiet, internal agony, a slow erosion of hope that makes your own eventual death feel less like a dramatic event and more like a long-awaited release. The Romans, in their attempts to manage the overwhelming reality of death, developed complex funerary rituals. You might participate in a grand procession for a wealthy noble, complete with professional mourners, trumpeters, and wax masks of ancestors, culminating in cremation or burial. Or you might witness the simple, unadorned burial of a pauper in a common ditch. These rituals, while offering a form of societal closure, also served as stark reminders of your own impending mortality. You would see the pyre consuming a loved one's body, or watch as earth was shoveled over a simple grave, understanding that this would, inevitably, be your fate too. This constant reinforcement of death's inevitability, while perhaps fostering a sense of resilience, also likely contributed to a certain fatalism regarding life's brevity. And what about the constant threat of being erased from history? A fear perhaps more profound for the ambitious Roman than mere physical death. We talked about damnatio memoriae, the deliberate act of wiping someone's existence from the public record. Imagine your greatest fear is not the end of your life, but the end of your legacy. The thought that all your struggles, your achievements, your very name, would vanish as if you had never existed. This adds a layer of psychological terror to the physical demise, particularly for the elite, a final awful way to die to be utterly forgotten. Even the landscape itself served as a perpetual memento mori. The catacombs, vast underground networks of burial chambers, lay beneath the bustling city, silent reminders of the countless generations who had walked these streets before you. The very ground you walked upon was saturated with the dust of the dead. It's a subtle, almost subconscious awareness that you are treading on the vestiges of millions of lives, and that one day, you too will join them beneath the earth. This omnipresent connection to the deceased fostered a unique perspective on life and its impermanence, a quiet melancholy beneath the vibrant surface of the empire. Consider the philosophical responses to death. Stoicism, a popular philosophy among the Roman elite, encouraged acceptance of fate, including one's own death. While perhaps providing a framework for coping, imagine the internal struggle to truly embrace the idea of your own unavoidable end, to truly believe that it is not something to be feared but simply a natural part of the cosmic order. This intellectual acceptance, while perhaps easing the emotional burden for some, did not diminish the physical agony or terror of the awful ways people died. The extent to which Stoic philosophy genuinely eased the fear of death for the average Roman is still a point of academic discussion, as evidenced by the rich variety of funerary epitaphs expressing both grief and hope. The specter of epidemic diseases, like the Antonine Plague or the Plague of Cyprian, which sometimes decimated large portions of the population, fundamentally altered the Roman perception of mortality. Imagine surviving one of these terrifying outbreaks, witnessing the swift, brutal end of neighbors, friends, and family. The sheer scale of death would be unimaginable, leaving survivors with a profound sense of vulnerability and the knowledge that at any moment, an unseen force could sweep through, claiming lives indiscriminately. This was not a death that could be controlled or understood, making it all the more terrifying. A chilling testament to the limits of human power in the face of microscopic adversaries. Ultimately, your journey through ancient Rome, observing the awful ways people died, has been a somber reminder of the human condition. Whether it was the sudden collapse of a building, the slow agony of a disease, the brutal efficiency of Roman justice, or the casual cruelty of a master. Death in ancient Rome was rarely a peaceful transition. It was often violent, undignified, and relentlessly cruel. Yet through it all, the Romans endured, built, and thrived, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. They lived with death as a constant companion, and in doing so, perhaps gained a deeper appreciation for the fleeting moments of life they were given.